Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why you're still struggling financially, even though you've worked hard your entire life? You've followed the rules. You've saved, sacrificed, and said yes when you wanted to say no. You've tried to be good, generous, disciplined, and yet there's this lingering feeling that no matter what you do, true financial peace never comes. You're tired, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. Tired of pretending you're okay when you're not. Tired of putting others first only to be left behind. Tired of watching your bank account grow slower than your anxiety. And here's the real question. Most people are too afraid to ask, what if your poverty has nothing to do with how much money you have, and everything to do with how you've been taught to think about it? What if you're not poor because you lack income, but because you've been unconsciously conditioned to sabotage your own abundance? Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Let that sink in. This means that the patterns you live, the ways you spend, give, lose, fear, avoid, or chase money might not even be your choices. They could be the echoes of other people's beliefs, your parents' fears, your culture's guilt, the religious shame surrounding wealth, the societal programming that equates poverty with purity and wealth with corruption. And so you walk through life carrying invisible rules you never agreed to. Rules like, wanting more is selfish. If I get rich, I'll become like them. Success means I'll lose people. I'm not smart enough to manage money. These are not facts, these are unconscious contracts. And you may have been living under them for decades. This video isn't about money management tips or passive income hacks. You can find that anywhere. What we're exploring here is far more powerful and far more dangerous to the systems that benefit from your silence. This is about how your mind was programmed to serve scarcity, how your energy is silently drained every time you feel guilty for wanting more, how your generosity is manipulated into obligation, how your logic is overridden by fear, and how beneath it all, there's a part of you that still believes you don't deserve to have more, because you never learned how to think critically about what money really is. So here's the uncomfortable truth. You're not poor because you lack money. You're poor because someone taught you to feel unworthy of wealth and you believed them. But what happens when you stop believing? What happens when you start thinking like Jung, observing your inner world, making the unconscious visible, and cutting ties with inherited scarcity? That's what we're about to uncover. This is the beginning of a mental reset, a financial detox. Not of your wallet, but of your identity. Think about the last time you made a financial decision that didn't make sense, not logically, but emotionally. Maybe you gave money to someone out of guilt. Maybe you bought something just to feel less invisible. Maybe you stayed silent about being underpaid because speaking up felt too risky. Or maybe you've just gotten used to living with less, even when more was possible. You tell yourself it's about responsibility, that you're being humble, that you don't need much. But deep down, you feel the tension. You feel the inner contradiction. Because here's the truth. You've been trained to abandon yourself financially. Since childhood, you've been absorbing emotional messages about money. Don't be greedy. Rich people are corrupt. Be grateful for what you have. It's better to give than to receive. These phrases sound wise, they sound moral, but when repeated enough times, they become commands, psychological programs that live in your nervous system. And suddenly, you find yourself saying yes when you want to say no, offering discounts before being asked, feeling uncomfortable when someone pays you well, over-explaining your prices, your value, your worth, feeling shame for wanting more. This isn't about selfishness. It's about identity confusion. Because somewhere along the way, you started equating poverty with virtue and wealth with betrayal. Carl Jung would call this a conflict between the persona, the mask you wear to be accepted, and the shadow, the part of you that craves independence, power, sovereignty. And here's where it gets dangerous. The more you repress your shadow, the more it controls you from the dark. You might think you're being generous, but what you're really doing is begging to be accepted. You work harder than most people you know, but still feel like you're not allowed to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You give, support, fix, solve, and yet feel guilty when you finally say, "I need something for me." That's not humility, that's internalized scarcity, a mindset passed down generation after generation until it became so normal. You stopped questioning it, and maybe no one ever told you this, but there are people in your life who love how generous you are, because your generosity keeps you small, keeps you quiet, keeps you underpaid. They don't want your strength, they want your service and the system you live in. It doesn't reward self-awareness, it rewards obedience. This is why logic alone isn't enough. This is why budgeting never fixed your anxiety. This is why working harder didn't end the struggle, because the root isn't outside of you. It's buried in your programming. And until you examine those emotional contracts, until you ask, whose beliefs am I living? Thunder, the cycle will continue. Carl Jung's entire life was dedicated to helping people become whole. Not happy, not successful, not rich, whole. And that process begins right here, in the discomfort of realizing that you've been following rules you never agreed to, in the courage it takes to question what you were taught to accept, and in the clarity that comes when you stop asking, how can I make more money, and start asking, what part of me still feels unworthy of having it? In the next part, we'll break down exactly how Jung's theory of the shadow applies to your relationship with money, and why bringing your unconscious beliefs into the light is the first step toward reclaiming not just your wealth, but your power. To understand why your financial life feels stuck, you need to understand something far more powerful than budgets or business plans. You need to understand your shadow. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the parts of yourself that you've rejected, denied, or pushed into the dark, not because they were wrong or evil, but because you were taught they were unacceptable. The shadow isn't just where you hide your rage or shame. It's also where you hide your ambition, your assertiveness, your desire to be seen, to earn more, to claim space. It's where you keep the part of you that wants money and feels guilty for it. You were told that asking for more was selfish, that charging what you're worth was arrogant, that confidence was ego, that power was dangerous, and so you buried it. But here's the paradox Jung revealed. What you resist not only persists, it grows stronger. The parts of you that you've denied don't go away. They become invisible drivers, shaping your behavior from the shadows. You stay small in negotiations. You sabotage opportunities that feel too big. You feel uncomfortable when abundance knocks and unconsciously push it away. You don't understand why you feel anxious when money comes in. You don't notice how quickly you give it away. You don't realize how often you put other people's needs above your own, not because you're kind, but because you're afraid of not being liked. And here's what Jung would tell you. The more disconnected you are from your shadow, the more others will use it against you. People will sense that you can't say no, that you want to be needed, that you feel guilty when you receive more than others, that you're driven by unseen wounds, and they'll press those buttons, not always out of cruelty, but because you've trained them to expect access to you for free. This is how the world drains not just your wallet, but your vital energy. And that's why so many people feel financially exhausted, not because of a lack of resources, but because of a lack of boundaries. So how do you bring this shadow into the light? You start by noticing every time your body says no, but your mouth says yes. You start by asking, why do I feel guilty when I win? Why do I apologize when I speak with authority? Why do I still believe that wanting more makes me a bad person? These aren't small questions. These are shadow work. And according to Jung, this is the real path to freedom, because when you integrate your shadow, when you stop rejecting your financial power, you become whole. You stop performing the good person role that costs you your peace. You stop giving everything away to prove your worth. You stop being ruled by unconscious guilt, and you begin to choose with clarity, with intention, with logic that isn't drowned in fear. This is not about becoming cold or ruthless. It's about becoming conscious, because only the conscious self can make conscious choices, and only conscious choices lead to conscious wealth. In the next part, we'll break this down into real-life patterns, the habits, reactions, and emotional traps that keep your money shadow hidden, and how to reclaim your authority without losing your humanity. Now let's make it real, because the shadow isn't just a theory. It's not something you explore in a book and forget. It lives in your daily life, in your bank account, in your inbox, in your relationships, and it reveals itself every time you handle money, every time you undercharge for your services, because you're just getting started. Apologize for asking what you're worth. Feel nervous when you receive a compliment tied to success. Spend money to feel valuable, or hoard it to feel safe. Say yes to unpaid work because you don't want to disappoint. Avoid raising your rates because they won't be able to afford it. In each of these moments, you're not making rational decisions. You're performing an emotional dance with your shadow, because the part of you that wants to grow, that wants to thrive, lead, earn, be seen, is still tied to the fear that you'll lose love if you do. Carl Jung explained that when we suppress these truths about ourselves, they don't disappear, they project outward. We start to see the world not as it is, but as a mirror of our own hidden beliefs. So you begin to believe people are cheap, there's no money out there, no one wants to pay for real value. I always attract clients who can't afford me. If I raise my standards, I'll lose everyone. But none of that is fact. It's your shadow talking back as dressed up as logic. And here's the pattern. The world will keep reinforcing these beliefs until you outgrow them, until you stop acting from guilt, until you stop confusing service with servitude, until you realize that every time you say it's okay when it's not, you're teaching people how to underpay, undervalue, and overlook you. The emotional patterns that show up around money are not coincidences. They're unconscious repetitions, and until you become radically aware of them, you'll keep calling them bad luck. You'll call burnout just how it is. You'll call being broke humble beginnings. You'll call emotional labor being a good person, and the shadow will remain in control, polite, passive, and deadly. But there's something else Jung taught us. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration. That means the solution isn't to deny your desire for wealth. It's to bring it into the light with maturity, clarity, and logic. To say, I want to be paid well. I want freedom. I want to stop apologizing for my standards. I want to be respected, without shame, without guilt, without the need to shrink to make others comfortable. This is how you take back your mind. This is how you build not just a smarter relationship with money, but a more honest relationship with yourself. In the next part, we'll uncover how most financial self-sabotage is driven by emotional scripts installed in childhood, and how reclaiming your power begins with learning to say one word: no. There's a moment, it might be quiet, private, even painful, when you suddenly see the cycle for what it is. Not a coincidence, not bad luck, not just the way life is, but a program, a repetitive loop you've been living inside, without realizing it. The underpayment, the exhaustion, the guilt, the fear of being seen as too much when you finally ask for what you deserve. It's all part of the same emotional architecture, and the moment you name it, the game starts to break. Carl Jung taught that transformation begins not with change, but with awareness. Until you become conscious, you will be ruled by the same patterns and call it destiny. So let's bring this into the light. Look back and ask yourself, how many times have I stayed quiet to keep the peace and lost my power? How many times have I said yes to a project, a favor, a request, just to avoid conflict? How many times have I accepted exposure instead of payment, praise instead of compensation, gratitude instead of respect? How many times have I convinced myself that it's just this one time and made it a lifetime? And how often have I told myself that I chose this when in fact I was simply reacting to fear, to shame, to the invisible pressure to remain agreeable, helpful, available? You don't break a cycle by hating it. You break it by understanding it, by seeing it for what it is, an outdated system running inside a mind that no longer wants to be controlled. Because the truth is, you weren't born to serve everyone's comfort. You weren't born to be a placeholder, a peacekeeper, or a low-cost emotional support system. You were born with the right to make choices, real choices, not reactions disguised as logic. And here's what that means. You don't have to say yes just because you're afraid they'll leave. You don't have to offer discounts just because they hesitate. You don't have to answer that message right now. You don't have to apologize for wanting more. You can pause, You can say, I need time. You can say, no, thank you. You can say nothing, because your energy is not public property. It's sacred. And when you start treating it that way, something incredible happens. People who only valued your availability begin to vanish. Situations that relied on your silence collapse. Relationships built on guilt disintegrate. It's painful. It's lonely. But it's honest. Because in that space, for the first time, you meet yourself. Not the version they molded. Not the mask you wore to survive. Not the script you followed for years. Just you, clear, conscious, and choosing your peace over your performance. And that is where true financial change begins. Not with a new strategy, but with the decision to stop negotiating your worth in exchange for belonging. In the next part, we'll explore how to protect your energy, reclaim your time, and become psychologically unavailable to systems and people who never deserved your sacrifice. After you break the cycle, after the guilt fades and the noise quiets down, what do you do next? You rebuild, but not from urgency, not from fear, not from revenge. You rebuild from presence, from clarity, from the quiet knowing that your energy is no longer available to anyone who hasn't earned it. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires a reorganization of energy. You stop bleeding into every conversation. You stop leaking approval in every interaction. You stop offering discounts on your time, your truth, your voice. You start observing. You walk into a room, and instead of trying to be liked, you scan for alignment. You receive a request, and instead of rushing to say yes, you pause and ask, is this a respectful exchange of energy or emotional taxation? You start treating your attention like currency, because it is. This is what conscious unavailability looks like. You no longer explain your silence. You no longer apologize for your boundaries. You no longer feel guilty for not being accessible. You no longer view rest as laziness. You no longer prove your worth through overgiving. Instead, you become selective, intentional, discerning, not cold. Not arrogant, not unkind, but wise. Because you now understand what few ever realize. You don't need to be everywhere to be respected. You don't need to respond to everyone to be valuable. You don't need to justify your worth to be worthy. And in that awareness, a new kind of wealth is born. Not just material, though that may come, but emotional wealth, mental wealth, energetic sovereignty. You begin to build a system of boundaries that isn't rigid, but intelligent. You say no without flinching. You pause before reacting. You walk away from conversations that drain you, even if they come wrapped in love. You detach from invitations that don't nourish your integrity. You no longer fear being misunderstood, because you finally understand yourself. And here's the paradox. The less available you become to the wrong people, the more magnetic you become to the right ones. People feel your peace. They sense your self-respect. They no longer approach you with demands, but with intention, because your silence is no longer absence. It's presence amplified, and that's what power sounds like when it doesn't need to shout. In the final part of this video, we'll talk about the loneliness that follows this transformation, and why that space, painful as it may be, is the gateway to your freedom. There's a kind of silence that follows awakening. It's not peaceful at first, it's raw, because once you stop being emotionally available to everyone, the world around you reacts. People pull away, some criticize, some accuse you of changing. And they're right, you have changed. But what they're really saying is, you're no longer playing the role I needed you to play, and that's not your problem to solve. This silence you now carry, it's not emptiness, it's space. Space to breathe, to think, to observe, to rebuild a relationship with money, with power, with yourself, on your own terms. You're not losing people. You're losing illusions. You're not becoming cold, you're becoming clear. And that clarity, that's where true wealth begins, not in numbers, but in boundaries, not in possession, but in peace, not in pleasing, but in presence. Carl Jung wrote that the journey of individuation requires solitude, not as isolation, but as sacred preparation. So if you feel alone right now, If you feel misunderstood, if you're questioning whether protecting your energy is worth it, let this be your reminder. The solitude of the strong is not a punishment. It's a passage. It's how you return to yourself. And when you arrive, you'll see that being unavailable to what drains you is what makes you truly available to what fulfills you. So now I'll leave you with one question, and I ask you to answer honestly. In the comments below, are you ready to be misunderstood? In the name of your peace, are you willing to be called selfish, distant, even arrogant, if that's the price of finally choosing yourself? If the answer is yes, write it, declare it, let it be known. I choose my peace. Because sometimes, a comment is not just a comment, it's a commitment. And if you're ready to keep walking this path of clarity, logic, and inner power, make sure to watch the next video. It's more important than you think. I'll meet you there.